Hello and welcome to this tutorial on trigger and collision handling. We will learn how to use trigger and collision events, how to distinguish between the different objects that we collide with to see what should happen in the different circumstances, and we will also learn how to load scenes. So first we will implement a few coins here for this game and a little score counter here. And that will increase when we collect a nice coin, and it will decrease when we collect a bad coin. Then we will implement in the bird project. Oh, that is not the correct scene. In this side view scene, a collision with the hornet. And if we collide with the hornet, we will get transitioned into the game over scene. All right, let's get started. So let's start by implementing triggers and the coin. To set up the coins, we should first create a prefab for them, since we want to have many coins and they should all be linked to a prefab instance. So first I'm gonna just drag in a coin here. So we have an object to create our prefab from, and then I will drag it back into my prefabs folder that now has the coin prefab in it. And then I can delete the object that I used to make the prefab from. And now I have my prefab here. I can open it to edit it, and I will just add a circle collider to it so we can collide with the coins. And since we want to have them trigger based, I check this little checkbox here that it says is trigger. We can observe what this does initially. Best if we just make a coin here and I uncheck it and then play. And now you can see that I cannot move through the coin. And since we want them to be collectible that you can run through and pick up, it is better to have them as a trigger so the character can move through them. Triggers are just areas that can be used to trigger a collision event if another object enters, leaves, or stays within the area. Colliders that are not triggers are meant to be solid objects in the world that other objects collide with, usually using a rigid body involved there to have physics going on. Since there are no physics involved in collecting a coin, except of course the overlap check, we should make them a trigger. Alright, okay, so now we have our coin object initially set up. Let's see how we test for a collision with a trigger. For that we would open our top-down player movement script, and we can check for the trigger event here when the player hits the coin. You can have the function that is called here on trigger enter 2D to intercept that trigger event in either of the two objects which are participating in an overlap with a trigger. So we could write a function on a script on the coin or on the player, since they will be called on both of them. The other function to intercept collision events would be on collision enter or exit or stay, right, respectively, if you want to test for entering, staying, or leaving a collision. And on collision enter is only called when colliding with another collider. So both of the colliders have to be non-triggers in the collision that is supposed to trigger on collision enter. If one of them or both of them are triggers, we get the on trigger enter event. Also very important, in order for these functions to be executed, at least one of the participating objects needs a rigid body attached to it. Otherwise, the collision events are not tested for and Unity will not fire them. The idea behind that is that any kind of physics object which is supposed to have collisions can only collide and trigger these events with other objects if it's moving. And any kind of moving, physically active object needs to have a rigid body in order to work properly, right? So in order for collision to happen, one of the objects or both of them need to move. So one or both of them need to have a rigid body attached to it. Okay, so let's get rid of on collision enter since we do not need that at this time. But we want the on trigger enter to the function. And in here, we want to increase a score. So I'm just gonna make a little public int score here and initialize that with 0. And we're gonna increase that when we have a trigger event. So just increment it with ++. All right, let's test this out. So I will make a few coins here for us to collect. Just drag them in. Then I select my player and I can see here the score field is exposed because it's public. So we have an easy way to keep track of it. And now if I go and touch the coins, right, the score increases. Now the coins don't disappear yet, and of course we don't want to be able to collect them multiple times. So let's destroy the object next when we do the collision event, or rather the trigger event. So when we go into the onTriggerEnter function, here we can see that it gets a parameter of type collider2D. And I like to call this other because it makes it a bit clearer that this is the other collider that we collide with. So in our case, that would be the collider on the coin. So this circle collider here, that is the one that is returned in this function if we collide with the coin. And in order to destroy an object, we can actually simply call the destroy function and give it the game object that we want to destroy. And that would be other.gameObject. So other is the collider2D component, and every component has a reference to its game object in the field game object that each component has. Now, if we would just destroy other, we would simply destroy the collider on the object, right? But since we want to get rid of the entire coin with all of its components and everything, we just destroy the game object. When we execute the game now, there we go, the coins disappear. Wonderful. And we have 3 score in the end. The next thing I like to show you is how to test when we or if we collide with different kinds of objects. So let's make a bad coin. So I just go and Control D, duplicate the coin prefab, and make this into a bad coin, and we'll color this red. And now I can also put a few of these in here. And right now it doesn't matter if we collect bad coin or good coin, or even if we actually collide with any kind of trigger, they will all be destroyed and all increase our score. So in the function here we have to test somehow with which kind of object we collide. The problem here is that the coins do not have any unique quality that sets them apart from other game object, right? So the only thing that is different is what kind of sprite they use, but that might change depending on if it's animated with a flipbook animation, for example, or the name. But the name also changes. Like here, this is called coin 1 and coin 2 if you instantiate more, so you can't really rely on that either. So we have to give them a sort of unique property that sets them apart and that we can test for in onTriggerEnter to see if we collide with a coin or a bad coin. And there you have basically 2 main choices. The first one is to add a tag, so we could tag the coins as being coins, or we could give them a script that we can then check with getComponent in the trigger function. So if we try to get the coin component from an object we collide with and it is there, we would know that we would hit a coin. But it's a bit easier to just set up a tag and then check for that. So let's do that. So for this, I will go to my coin, open the prefab to edit it, and then in tag, I will add a tag. Click the little plus here to make a new one, and I will call this coin. And then I will choose the same here for the bad coins, add a tag, and this would be bad coin. All right. Now we have to apply the tags. So bad coin should be tagged as bad coin and coin should be tagged as coin. Okay, and now we can check for these tags in on trigger enter. The easiest way to do that is use the compare tag function, and that will just check if this game object is tagged with tag. We can call that from the game object of other. Or actually you can also call it directly from the component, which just overloads it from the game object, but this is a bit clearer since we check the tag on the game object and we want to check here for coin. Alright, so if this is the coin, then we increment the score, and if we hit a bad coin, so if compare tag would be true for bad coin, then we decrement the score. Here we can try this now. So if I hit play, we are in the game window and have a look here on the score. If I collect a bad coin, we get the -1 score, and if I collect a good coin, we get the +1 score. And it's a zero-sum game, so we end back at 0 score in the end. So that was triggers and collecting items. Now let's go ahead and look at the onCollision enter function a little bit more. For that, we will go back to our bird example here, and we will have the bird collide with the enemy and then transfer to a game over screen. So we can learn a bit about level loading as well. Now for this we have to check the bird and add a collider and a rigid body to it, and we also have to check the hornet, and this should get a collider and a rigid body too, because it is also moving. Everything that has collisions and moves should have a rigid body, right? So I can actually multi-select these two objects and edit both of them at the same time, and here I can add a collider. It would be a circle collider, and I can also add a rigid body 2D to both of them. Now, since we have programmed our own displacement-based movement for the bird, we have to set up the rigid body to support this. So first of all, we should either disable the gravity scale, or what we can also do is we can set the body type to kinematic, which means that it is a rigid body that is not actually meant to have any kind of physics interaction at all, so no force exchange with other objects. But we can still use it for collisions if we use full kinematic collisions here, and that means it will still trigger the onCollision and onTriggerEnter functions. If you don't have this checked, the rigid body won't actually be used to fire those events. So make sure you have this checked if you want to use a kinematic rigid body that also triggers the events for trigger and collision enters. And just to make sure, I can also check freeze rotation here so that our burns don't start spinning randomly. Alright, next up, the hornet of course needs to have some sort of identification. And here we have the Hornet script on it already. So let's use this this time to identify that we collide with a Hornet instead of a tag. You can write the collision logic in either the bird or the Hornet script. There is actually no rule for where you would have to write it, since both receive the on-collision enter call if they should touch. But I'm going to choose the bird here, and in the bird script, we're going to write a new function that would be on collision enter 2D. And here you can see that we don't actually get a collider pushed, but we get a collision pushed. So as a parameter. And this collision object holds information about the collision that is, for example, the impact point or the force that they hit with. So we have different kinds of information available here. We also have the contact, kind of like how many points touch, right? And there is this kind of information, or the relative velocity to each other, because it's a physical collision, and that is being used for more than just detecting overlaps. For example, you could spawn some sparks or some effect where they touch, or you could have the objects affect each other based on how fast they are colliding. This information that's saved in the collision object, but what we are actually interested in is simply the game object. That is the same as the game object that we get through other game object in the onTriggerEnter function. So what we want to test for is if this game object has the Hornet script. And we can check for that by simply saying if this game object, and then we can use the getComponent function again to grab a script. We're gonna grab Hornet, and then if this is not equal to null, so if it returns something, right? If it returns something, the script exists, and if it returns null, the script doesn't exist on the other object, in which case it wouldn't be a Hornet. Good, but if this is the case and we collide with the Hornet and the object has a script, then we can simply transfer ourselves to the game over screen. So to load a scene, we have to implement the scene manager, for which we need the scene management namespace imported. We make use of the scene management namespace by simply implementing using and then unity engine dot scene management. This will make sure that we have access to any kind of scene management functionality. We want to use the scene manager to load a scene. We want to load game over. Now we don't have game over yet, so let's make the scene so we can load it. To create a new scene, we should just make a new scene here with file, basic2d. All right, create. We can save the current scene and then say save as. And I want to save in my scenes folder here and call this game over. So the same name as the scene that we want to load. And in here, I will just add a UI text that says game over. And I can make this a bit bigger. I have to adjust the size, width and height of the UI element here. Right, and let's just make this red so it looks bad. Okay, game over, great. Doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to show how to do a scene transition. Good. Now if we would go back to our side view scene and start this, I have to try and hit the hornet. Ooh, there we go, but nothing happens. Now, why would that be? Well, you can see down here that it throws an error that game over could not be loaded because it has not been added to the build settings. And whenever a script has an error, it will stop executing this part. And the game doesn't necessarily need to crash, but you should always have an eye on this bar down here to see if you get any errors thrown. Now it will notice that there is a game over scene, but it couldn't be loaded. Let's fix that. If you load any kind of scene, or if you want to transition to a scene, you have to make sure that this scene is part of the build settings in Unity. And this is under File and Build Settings here. And there you have to make sure that the scenes in build contain all of the scenes that you want to work with. So here we go. Now they are a part of the build settings. So now if I go ahead and hit the hornet, we're gonna get a game over screen. Boop, there we are. Great. So that will conclude this video. We have learned how to do trigger and collision event handling and how to transition between scenes. We also learned how to identify objects based on their tag or on a script that they have to discern with which kind of object we collide.